What had happened was more terrifying than the worst nightmare. Princess Sophia sat on the cold stone floor, leaning against the icy wall, her breath shallow and uneven. There were no tears in her eyes, they had dried up, like the screams locked inside her. Her chest felt hollow, but it was not relief she felt, it was an abyss, black and all-consuming. He stood before her. Her brother. Speak of this to no one. Do you understand? His voice was hoarse but firm. Sophia did not reply. She could not. A few months later, whispers spread through the corridors of Buckingham Palace. The princess is with child. It was unthinkable. Sophia was unmarried, had never left the palace walls, had received no secret admirers. But every secret has its root. Later, historians, poring over memoirs and letters from that time, would come to one horrifying conclusion: the one responsible for the disgrace bore the same blood as the unfortunate princess. The forbidden lives of princesses, prisoners of the palace. Buckingham Palace, grand and opulent, concealed not only royal splendor behind its walls but also the tragedy of young hearts. The daughters of King George III lived as though in a gilded cage, beautiful yet merciless. They were forbidden even to glance in the direction of men. Conversations or friendships were out of the question, even the gardeners had to lower their eyes if a princess happened to be near. Any form of attention, a hint, a mere look, everything could lead to punishment. But what can be done with a heart that does not obey commands? Each of the king's daughters longed for love. They grew up surrounded by luxury, receiving the finest education, studying languages, history, and philosophy. They were trained in music, dance, and refined manners. But the most important lesson they learned was how to hide their desires. Separation from the only comfort. In their joyless world, the princesses had one solace: Lady Finch, the royal governess. She had devoted 3 decades of her life to the family of George III, becoming a second mother to the king's daughters. Sophia, the gentlest and most sensitive of the sisters, adored her beyond measure. But fate seemed determined to take from the princesses all that could warm their hearts. In 1792, Lady Finch lost her sight and was forced to leave the palace. Sophia was devastated. "This is unjust," she whispered, hiding her tears. In one of her letters, she wrote bitterly, "It is so unfair that the best among us must endure the greatest hardships." But Sophia did not yet know that the darkest trials were still to come. The king's madness and the imprisoned princesses. The grand walls of the palace concealed not only luxury and splendor, but also fear, despair, and endless loneliness. Queen Charlotte worried for her daughters' futures, but what frightened her even more was the state of her husband. King George III, once a strong and rational ruler, was sinking ever deeper into madness. One day, he would recognize his wife and children, speak with them, and discuss affairs of state. The next, he would roam the palace halls, muttering incoherent words, or fall into a state of deep apathy. He could stare into the void for hours or suddenly begin conversing with imaginary companions. With each passing year, his condition worsened. And with it, the princess's dreams of happiness crumbled. Shattered hopes for freedom. Once, the king had planned a grand tour across Europe to find suitable husbands for his daughters. The marriages were to be both advantageous and secure. But now, those plans had become nothing more than an unattainable dream. Charlotte understood that if her daughters married, they would leave England. They would travel far away to other kingdoms, while she would remain alone with her mad husband, alone with his rage, his apathy, his fears. And so, the idea of her daughters marrying began to seem dreadful to her. "Are you bored?" the queen would arch an eyebrow whenever the princesses, unable to hide their sorrow, complained of their monotonous lives. "Then read, do some embroidery, or take a walk in the garden." But could walks ever replace freedom? Could embroidery silence the longing for a life filled with love and passion? A gilded cage with no escape. The eldest daughter, named after her mother, had managed to marry, an arrangement made long before the king's descent into madness. But for the others, there was no hope and no choice. "I enjoy the company of my daughters," George III declared during one of his rare moments of lucidity. "I do not wish to share it with anyone." And so, their fate was sealed. The princesses remained locked within the palace, young, beautiful, longing for love. Their future had been decided. They became prisoners of royal will, captives with no right to happiness. The dark side of the royal family. King George III's madness became the curse of his dynasty. It was passed down to his children, manifesting in different, and sometimes terrifying, ways. His eldest son, the future George IV, lost all restraint in food and drink over the years. He gained weight at an alarming rate, growing to monstrous proportions. Prince Adolphus, on the other hand, seemed to burn from within. He could survive on just 4 hours of sleep a night, never knew exhaustion, and lived in a state of constant tension. But the most terrifying one was not them. The prince who inspired fear. Ernest Augustus, Duke of Cumberland, had been marked by an uncontrollable temper since childhood. Where his brothers concealed their emotions, he unleashed his with fury. He would strike a servant for mere clumsiness, shout at courtiers, and display alarming cruelty, even in childhood games. He cared little for public opinion. Even Queen Charlotte, his own mother, feared openly opposing him. Unlike him, Princess Sophia was gentle and trusting. She had grown up seeing her brothers as protectors. Ernest was 6 years her senior, and to her, he was simply a brother, hot-tempered, harsh, but still family. She had no idea what darkness he harbored within. The year that changed everything. The year 1799 was fateful. Princess Sophia was 22 years old. That was the year something terrible happened, something that would change her forever. But it was forbidden to speak of it. A shameful secret that could not be named. Princess Sophia was only 22 when her world collapsed. She sat on the cold floor, hugging her knees to her chest, her body shaking with silent sobs. There were no more tears, they had long since dried. All that remained was numbness. "Say nothing of this. Do you understand?" her brother hissed, looming over her. The one she had trusted most, the one she had believed to be her protector since childhood, had become the cause of her worst nightmare. What had happened was so monstrous that no one dared to say it aloud. But silence could not keep the truth hidden forever. An invisible war within the palace. Rumors seeped through the thick walls of Buckingham Palace. Sophia had grown withdrawn, avoiding company, locking herself away for hours. Her sisters noticed her pallor, her maids whispered behind her back. Months later, the whispers grew louder. "Princess Sophia is with child." It was impossible. She was unmarried. The royal family understood, if the truth came to light, their reputation would be destroyed. Sophia could not defend herself, she could only submit in silence to the will of her mother and the court advisors. The legend of the Major General. In the spring of 1800, Princess Sophia gave birth to a baby boy. But officially, she was never acknowledged as his mother. The infant was hastily declared the son of Major General Thomas Garth, a 55-year-old military officer who had long served at court. Garth had never been considered handsome, a large birthmark covered his face. Women showed him little favor, making the idea of a romance with a young princess seem absurd. Yet, he dutifully accepted the role assigned to him. As a reward for his silence, he was permitted to claim the child as his own and was soon granted new privileges. Moreover, Garth was even made the boy's godfather. But then a problem arose. The church forbade a father from serving as his own child's godparent. This law was widely known, which meant Garth could not have been the real father. And so, the courtiers realized, no matter how hard they tried to conceal the truth, the rumors had already named the true father. Late freedom and eternal darkness. When Queen Charlotte died in 1818, the princesses finally gained the long-awaited freedom they had been denied for so many years. But there was no one left to rejoice. Their youth had long since faded, their dreams of marriage and love had turned to dust, and the fears and restrictions imposed by their father had become part of their very nature. Sophia was 41 by then. Her life took a different course from that of her sisters. She left Buckingham Palace and moved to Kensington, where she lived near her young niece, the future Queen Victoria. Sophia grew deeply attached to the girl, becoming a kind of gentle shadow from the past. But while Victoria saw the palace as a home brimming with life and anticipation, for Sophia, it became a place of solitude and oblivion. Time took everything from her. By 1838, Sophia had gone blind. Like her old governess before her, she was plunged into eternal darkness. She spent the last 10 years of her life in complete isolation, forgotten even by her own family. Blood on his hands. And what of Ernest? His life followed a different path, one of power, intrigue, and the fear he instilled in those around him. On the 31st of May, 1810, a scandal shook the royal family. In Ernest Augustus's chambers, his valet, Jonathan Saleys, was found dead. His body lay in a pool of blood, a deep wound slashed across his throat. The official explanation? Suicide. But no one believed it. Rumors swept through the palace. Some whispered that Saleys had known too much, that he had overheard something for which he had paid with his life. Others suspected he had fallen victim to Ernest's infamous rage. And there were those who were convinced Saleys had uncovered the truth about Sophia. But, just like with his sister, the truth remained buried. Ernest Augustus faced no consequences. On the contrary, years later, in 1837, he ascended the throne of Hanover, becoming King Ernest Augustus I. He ruled until 1851, leaving behind a kingdom filled with fear and whispers. A forgotten story. Princess Sophia faded into the shadows. Historians who studied her letters searched for hints of what had happened, but all that Sophia left behind was silence. Her secret remained a stained, an untold page in British history.